So I tell you, I guess we all know each other, except I'm going to introduce Ryan Garrison. He's from Hunt Engineers. Um, so for people going to watch on YouTube, I'm Jason Leifer, supervisor, town of Dryden. As probably heard all over the place, we're building our own municipal fiber network. We're going to run it as a municipally owned and operated ISP. And back in 2019, we hired Hunt Engineers to conduct a survey and a study to see about the feasibility of municipal broadband service in the town of Dryden. That study is available on our website. If you can't find it, you'd be able to email me or my secretary and we can get you a copy if you haven't looked at it. But the idea is to compete directly with existing providers in town. So what we're looking to be able to cover every single residence and business in the town of Dryden. Sorry, I'm in a meeting. I can't. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Hazards of being in an office. So so we're looking to compete directly with Spectrum, Point Broadband, HughesNet, Frontier. And the reason is because not a single one of those services covers everybody in the town. The prices are all over the place. The speed and reliability of the service is all over the place as well. And we're building a fiber to the home system, so it'll be the latest technology you can get. We're looking to compete on technology and price. We'll have our own customer service set up, our own installation company, helping us. And in the future, we may end up hiring some people on the town payroll to run it, but right now that's not in the cards. We're looking to contract things out at the moment, but unlike some other systems we're going to be dealing with, there are other municipalities that do this, and they partner with a private entity or a local development corporation like Empire Access or STN, and the municipality may help with the grants, but they may not own the backbone or other parts. We're going to own everything. And today we've been funding it with ARPA money, an Appalachian Regional Commission grant. We're applying for a community development block grant for a small part of the system, but we're also going to be continuing to look for more funding from USDA for rural broadband monies, and also the state broadband office. As they get up and running, they have about $1 billion to distribute around the state to help with access. So the access issues aren't just about, though there a lot of people think that access just has to do with infrastructure not being there, but it also has to do with cost. So our plan is to address both of them with this way where we're going to be competing directly with the existing ISPs. So we're introducing competition, but also covering areas that they don't cover. So that's why when you see the map, when we talk about maps and things at TCOG and even the county legislature and everything, I really don't worry about the mapping because we're just building out along every road anyway. Dryden's not concerned with mapping anymore because we're planning on covering every single inch of ground in the town. And when we costed out the system, I think you'll see in the study is an estimate of just under 15 million. With inflation like that, it might come in higher than that, but that doesn't mean you're bonding out 15 million or anything like that at any one time. It means that's what the expected total cost will be. But as we add customers, which we'll be doing this year, you'll have revenue coming in, which can be applied towards not only paying back any bans or bonds you might have taken out for operating capital, but also sink right into the system and continue buying fiber and other equipment. So that's how we're doing it in a nutshell. But Ryan's here to explain how they can help out. And you're also working with Yates County, and I guess you can really say who else they're working with. But I guess the message I really have is this is something doable for certainly a town our size, the county, I've always felt should be doing this to some degree, but they're choosing not to. For various reasons. It's not easy to do, but we have scale and a size, like a kind of like I think Ryan's described us as being the perfect size to handle it. But things that are coming down the pike that might make it easier for Dryden to help out other towns are some legislation from the state that's going to address the crossing municipal boundaries issues that we've run into with bonding, and also just with being able to offer service in small parts of another town. Because for instance, like when we're building and driving, we're probably gonna have to cross into Caroline for short parts of it, and it makes no sense to not run the fiber and service the homes there, even if it's just 10 houses. But under the existing state law, it would be difficult to do that legally. Anyway, I'll give it or hand it off to Ryan so you can ask him any questions you have.
So I did prepare a little presentation if you guys would like to see that. I wasn't sure what the format was going to be. Is that okay? All right,
And Dan's gonna be on here as well, so you can, if you have questions for Dan.
Yeah.
Feel free to ask. I just gotta step away for a second.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Dan. So can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So what I thought I'd present to the group today and then kind of open it up for questioning was just a little presentation of what Dryden looked at as far as the different models available to different what I'll call public entities, and how they decided to come to the decision of doing a municipal service of the way that they did. So just to give you a brief introduction of who I am, Ryan Garrison from Hunt Engineers, Architects and Land Surveyors. We are an upstate New York firm. We have an office in Horseheads. We work in many of your communities and school districts and governmental and all different verticals, civil, highway, bridges. But a couple of the things we do here that are unique are technology consulting, which then kind of developed into broadband development. I was just getting brought into rooms, being asked questions about broadband development when I was a general technology consultant. And what I found to be valuable with my perspective was that, I had a true third-party view, and I wasn't coming at it from any one perspective. If you talk to Spectrum, you're going to get one side of things. If you talk to Empire Access, you're going to get another side of things. And there was never someone as an independent party to kind of act as an in-between, specifically in Bradford County, Pennsylvania. That's where I started it all. And essentially that kind of developed into a dark fiber network, much like STN, and we're building that out to this day. That model was very specific to Pennsylvania law. We had to do it that way. But the idea is the same as STN. We build a middle mile, and that will allow service providers to penetrate areas that they could not before. Great idea. You encourage competition, all these great things. You see it put into actual practicality, and you start to see the pros and cons of each different model. So, just to kind of then delve into, the general history of public utilities. It was due to public necessity. So the reason why I have that there is because broadband at this moment is a hot button public necessity for multiple different reasons, whether it be where you choose to live, whether it be, can you guys see my actual presentation screen?
No, we're
Okay,
looking at with the slides in the far left column.
Okay, yeah, but okay, I just want to make sure we were looking at the same thing. I'm not in presentation mode. That seems to screw things up for me, but okay. And this is another key point. They were also public utilities were created because of natural economy of scale. Multiple people need water. It only makes sense to build a project and work with that economy of scale to get that done. The nature of public utility, unfortunately, lends itself to monopoly, and that turns into regulation always. And ultimately, it's a great public benefit, but a lot of the times you end up with some flaws, such as a sole provider and no options if that provider is insufficient in any particular ways. Communications have been a little unique in the fact that they actually came in and rode technologies that weren't initially purposed for internet, I'll say. So they came in on the telephone lines and they came in on the cable lines. So there wasn't this big discussion about necessity, public necessity, and all these things. And it became a public market, that certain providers could choose where they would serve and where they wouldn't serve. And you kind of got a hodgepodge. And because of the Rural Electrification Act that we'll talk about, that was from 1936, that put power to every home. And I think that's a good analogy for broadband. I think broadband needs to be ran to every home, much like the Rural Electrification Act, just in totality. I think that's the way to do it. But there's some, deeper things that happened here that, kind of set the stage for where broadband is today. But essentially, it was an act passed by Congress. It provided financing to power companies and cooperatives to install electrical and telephone to rural unserved communities. So that's one of the ways that telephone became a medium for broadband, is because it just happened to be there. They've even tried electrical lines at certain times to do broadband. But the one key thing here is you still see some of these cooperatives alive today. You see some of these municipal electric companies alive today. I think there's one in Groton that comes to mind immediately. This really set the stage for how some public utilities were going to be done. And ultimately, the result was everybody had access to electricity by the end. Broadband. So it started with DSL dial-up. You use this telephone wires to deliver access to the internet. It really gives the impression to that everyone is served because of the way ADSL theoretically has sufficient bandwidth. But ultimately, what I know as an engineer is that copper is limited in its physical capabilities. For instance, ADSL service is rated as 25 megabytes per second download by 3 megabytes per second upload. The physical characteristics of cable limit that distance and that capability to like less than a mile from any active equipment. So what I know is that ADSL service is served well past a mile of the node out in rural areas. I work a lot in rural areas and rural villages and communities like that. And we see it on the speed test when we do surveys. It comes back where folks that have ADSL service are at well under 10 megabytes per second. And so really it's one of these technologies that everybody has on the FCC maps. It looks like it's a served area, but the reality is these folks are getting way less than they're promised. Next came cable internet. And that just used cable infrastructure, which is also copper, to deliver the internet. Because it's thicker, it allowed for increased bandwidth capabilities. And like DSL technologies, it utilizes active network electronics, and which means they've got stuff everywhere that they've got to power to repeat the signal, to keep it going. And which means there's a lot of points of failure. There's a lot of connectors. There's a lot of powered components that have to be backed up with a battery in case of a power outage, so forth. And cable, and because of their access to these highly dense markets, cable companies became some of the largest media corporations in the whole world. And you still see that today. And, in my opinion, it kind of plays into my advantage a little bit because they're a little slow to react. In the rural areas, we started to see wireless line of sight services. In our area, it's very hard to do this consistently, but it is a good option, and it does get folks better bandwidth than they're getting through telephone service in many cases. My problem with it is, from an engineer, is that there's a high total cost of ownership, in my opinion. It's a highly equipment-based solution. So when you think about where you spend public dollars, you know, do you spend it on equipment, or do you spend it on a cable that has 40 years, you know, as opposed to 10 years that equipment might last you? So it's a length of investment type of thing. And I've seen a lot of these wireless solutions fall short because they're finicky. There's a lot of maintenance involved with them. There's a lot of problems getting to certain residents. So it's just, you know, it's a good option, but it's a little problematic. Satellite, I will say that this is getting interesting. It's getting much better. But again, it's equipment-based solution, so it's a short life of an investment. You know, when you start to make equipment upgrades, for instance, and you've got satellites in the air, you're limited to the access you have to those satellites. You either have to pull them out, deploy new satellites, or you need to do what you can do with the technology that's already up there. So you start to see and also low Earth orbit varies by up to 20 miles. So what you see when you try to find how these satellite services like Starlink perform, which Starlink is a good one, they perform pretty well for satellite, but it varies highly because of the shape of the orbit. It varies, you know, they can be as close as 20 miles from the surface and as far away as 40 miles from the surface. And they've got weird orbits. But it is a good service, and you know, it's definitely evolving. Then comes along fiber to the home. Fiber is limitless in its capacity. It's been around since the 70s, and it really hasn't changed a whole lot other than advances in the materials. It allows for passive networks, and we'll get more into this and how Dryden used this to their advantage. But passive networks allow for limited electronics and thus limited points of failure, and thus limited maintenance, limited staff to service the equipment. You know, it solves a lot of problems when you have less cabinets to take care of and just more miles of fiber. The current technology that we're using delivers up to 10 gigabytes per second to any one particular home. We don't offer that as a service yet. And actually, the new standards are going to 25 gig and 40 gig, and these are symmetrical speeds over fiber. So really the technology advancements are surpassing some of the needs, but we'll touch on that a little bit in a couple of slides. Your limitations start to become your incoming wholesale bandwidth. How much bandwidth can you buy to redistribute? That's your major cost point. And because you have all this capacity out to the homes, really that becomes your limiting factor. You know, and the data can facilitate any application, both internet, phone, and cable services. Now we're starting to see cable services move towards an online subscription service, and the same thing with phones. And why this is key goes back to the public utilities and regulation. At this point, New York State doesn't really regulate broadband. They regulate telephone dial tone, and they regulate cable service. And if you would like to provide either one of those, you have to get what's called a certificate of necessity, public necessity. And they're very hard to get. You have to show why the public needs this over top of the current service. It's just kind of messy, but broadband only keeps us out of that. So Dryden's specific strategy is let's do data only, and we'll support these other online services for our members, but let's limit it to data only so that we can stay out of that regulation. So just to show you some general bandwidth speed trends, you know, in the year of 2010, and then again in 2021. This is obviously complicated because of what is possible versus what the service offerings you see actually are. But in 2010, fiber was around, fiber to the home was around. You saw it a lot in very populated, high income areas. People would do pet projects and you'd see that kind of thing happen. And really what they were offering folks was non-symmetrical speed, 100 megabytes by 20. And that still exists as a base service from a lot of fiber to the home providers today. Cable was all the way down at standard service was 30. The advertised speeds were 30 by, I don't know, 2, 3, some megabytes per second upload. So they were low, and they've done some good work over the last few years. And DSL was at 10 megabytes by 1 megabyte per second. If you flash forward to 2021, satellite, it looks small, but they're under 100 megabytes per second, and this is Starlink that I'm referring to. And it varies. I've seen some speeds as high as in the hundreds of megs, all the way down to 50, 60 megs. So I would say that they're sub 100 megs per second with about 10 megs upload speed and a high latency, which is key for video. You've seen fiber go right to 10 gig symmetrical because of the lack of need of overhead. They've just gone right to symmetrical service, which is what Dryden plans to do. Coaxial cable has improved to about 1 gig. They have 1 gig offerings now. And I think the upload speeds are, I think that's about 100 maybe. And that's currently their top offering. So they've increased all the way from 30 megs to 1 gig offering, but that's the limit to their service today. And you can see the problem right here. In 2021, compared to everything else, DSL is nothing. It's nothing. So why get involved? This is there's community interest. I think that's why you folks are talking to me right now. You hear it from your community. Dryden has shown that the community has interest in this by doing a survey, putting the idea right out to them and saying, this is what we're interested in doing. Are you interested? And, like 94% of folks said they were interested in a service. So I think there's a lot of community interest, and that can play into your advantage as you plan your broadband activities. The community will be down for whatever you guys want to do, usually, and unless it's raising taxes. But there are different models to look at. So the other key point is no one else will make this happen. That is one of the experiences that I've learned working with different communities is the service providers have no boundaries. You folks have boundaries around your communities. You have focus points where they do not. We'll get into it a little bit in competition, but they're looking for the softest markets that they can penetrate and dominate. And for us folks that are looking at rural broadband, the only way to get them out into certain areas is to either do something yourself or force them into doing something. But either way, it starts with you guys. And I truly believe that. And then if done correctly, it can be a great investment for your community. And that's not just from the benefit perspective, but from a monetary perspective. If you think about this in the right way and put your money in the right places, you'll find that you'll get a return on your investment. And you can either do this at very little cost to the community, or at sometimes a great benefit to the community, where not only can this thing generate subscription fees for the service, but also you're sitting on an asset that could be worth up to hundreds of millions of dollars. You see these things being sold in the private market for hundreds of millions of dollars. So, think about it that way when you start to plan your broadband network is where are you putting your money? If you're putting it in a place where you're not going to own the thing, are you going to see a return for your investment so that it costs very little to your community? Or if you do invest money in infrastructure, do you own that infrastructure? And can you realize the value of that infrastructure? So what options are available? So there's investments in private companies. We've seen that. Hunt has been part of that. There's public-private partnership agreements, which we've also been part of. There's a municipal service model, and there's what we call a leasable model as well. And, you know, I think all of this, in my opinion, really depends on what size and what your motivations are. You know, for instance, if you're a very small community and you have one area, one road that's a problem, just one single road, you know, an investment in a private company, while I don't agree with that strategy at a very high level, at a very low level and a very acute level, I mean, that can be a way to deal with problems. But my opinion is more of a public-private partnership agreement is the way to attack that. If you don't want to get involved in being an ISP or providing a service yourself, but you want to encourage, you know, a private company to do so. I put the word agreement in here very specifically because I believe that should be a contractual agreement, and that you should see a return on your investment if you're putting public dollars to a private company. So, you know, it's great to partner with a local provider. You guys have some good ones in the area in Tompkins County, and just so long as the taxpayers are getting something back to where it's very little risk for the community to do something like that, I think it's a good option. Municipal service is a little more risky, but it's a lot more control over the situation. You know, and then when you look at the risk, there are ways to mitigate the risk. So, but that's actually you delivering service, collecting a subscription fee, and you control all aspects of that. So you can control what type of service, what type of infrastructure, more specifically, the cost piece of this. You know, if affordability is an issue for your community, municipal service is a good option because, you know, you can control that price. You can set the model at which you set the rate. So in Dryden, we're going to set it at $50, or a little less than $50 for the base model, but we're going to address that every year. And as costs go down, and as we see value in multiple people signing up and an increased number of subscribers, we're going to give them as much bandwidth for as little cost as we can. And, you know, I think that's the affordability control that you get with a municipal service model. One we've been thinking of a lot lately, at least I have been, is a leasable model, which is like it's like a municipal model, but it's where you build the fiber infrastructure, you retain the value of that fiber infrastructure, but then you do a long-term lease with someone to operate it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So public-private partnership, like I said, contractual agreement. It can be developed around a specific funding opportunity. So you can partner with Clarity Connect, for instance, on the USDA Reconnect project. And where they're afraid of the USDA, towns are more used to working with USDA. So like there's a compromise that comes along with something like that. And what I've found success in at the county level specifically is in Yates County and Livingston County, we partnered with Empire Access to go for USDA Reconnect. And the whole scope of that partnership is basically around the USDA contract. So from the county's perspective, they have control over where is served, who gets served. You know, the USDA requires those areas to be served if you get funded. So there's like all this control built into that agreement now because you've scoped it around a certain funding source. Agreements can vary, but you know, they basically boil down to a loan with a private provider where you receive revenue share, and that pays back the loan that you provided to them. And what's also nice about that is it puts skin in the game for both entities. P3s are great options for rural and unserved areas that no company is willing to go to. Municipal model, municipally owned infrastructure that delivers broadband as a service. There's multiple ways to accomplish this, all with different levels of risk and reward, but we'll talk about Dryden specifically here in a minute. Unlike other public utilities, broadband is voluntary. So take rate must be achieved by providing a superior service. And fiber is how we're going to do that, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. Competition does exist in this model. However, fiber systems, again, provide an inherent competitive advantage that we see other private companies using all the time. Leasable model, you build a fiber to the home network that the public entity owns and leases out to a private provider to use and provide service. This can be done multiple ways, but there are several factors to consider, and we've run into some of these in Dryden when we were entertaining which types of networks we were going to build. But you do get to control the technology that you want, so if you want a fiber to the home network, that's what you can do. You can secure long-term agreements with private providers to operate the network, one or many. I see some issues with many, and we'll talk about that on the competition slide. So I've got a little bit of a hot take with competition. I do like competition, but one of the things that can happen with competition is you have to be a disruptor in the market, and we'll talk about that on the competition slide. If you ever do something like this, I would say do not include electronics, or don't be talked into being the electronics provider on one of these networks, because that's where all the risk is. And if you're willing to accept that risk, that's good. If you want someone else to assume that risk, don't do the electronics. What we see is people do these leasable networks where they think they're off the hook for operating the network, but they're really completely on the hook for operating the network because they run all the electronics. So, but you also do retain and realize the growth in the public entity's investment. And you do have connections everywhere. So creating competition, there's some hot takes here, but to win markets, what I've learned from working with local providers is you have to disrupt the market. You can't just go in and be Spectrum and compete against them. Service providers don't want to compete. You think that opening up markets to someone with very little barriers would be something that would encourage competition and get second and third parties into that market, but they have no interest in being number 2 or 3. They want to go into a market, disrupt that market, take all the competition. And the big disruption these days is fiber into cable area. Some of the cable providers are in a big panic right now to deploy as much fiber to the home as they can so that that market doesn't get disrupted. But that's essentially one of the issues with broadband competition is we've seen it. We've seen it tried in multiple different ways with the middle mile and with a last mile kind of open access model. But you get one fiber to the home carrier that penetrates Corning, New York. That's where I'm from, so I can speak to this. And nobody there, you won't see another one come in. They're not going to come in and try to compete with another fiber to the home provider because they don't have any competitive advantage over the other one. And there's a little bit of trap around this because competition's good and it's healthy and people want to do it. But facilitating a market, investing a lot of money into facilitating a market where providers have the least amount of risk is kind of a trap, in my opinion. So what we've seen in other models is we've seen people build a fiber to the home network, power it with electronics, and say, hey, service providers, you just plug into the back end of this thing, you offer up your service on like a website, and our users can pick and choose who they want, and you compete for their service, and it sounds good. But with the physical infrastructure, they have no skin in the game. So yeah, they can go down to $10 internet, but the town has to pay for all of the infrastructure, all the electronics, and all the risk associated with operating that. So they're really not off the hook at all. They actually have to facilitate this marketplace and all the complex ins and outs of it. So those are just some notes that I have on the competition. So why would you choose a municipal model? I think it's because of the topology, really. At a village or a town level, fiber to the home requires one equipment location within roughly 7 miles of any subscriber. So in Dryden, we're going to have 3 or 4 cabinets, and that's going to be it. And we can serve all 6,000 households with those 4 cabinets, as opposed to some other types of networks that, they're going to require 60 cabinets to do that amount of customers. One fiber can serve 32 or 64 customers, depending on how we split it in a typical design. It supports 10 gig symmetrical speeds and continuing to increase. And we use laser monitors lasers to monitor the network, and we can determine exactly where a fault location happens. So these are just some common concerns and questions that happen with fiber to the home networks, and those are how we address them. What does it take to be a service provider? Fiber installers, fiber repair people, customer installers, customer service folks, network operators, customer billing people. It's a whole group effort. And one thing we noticed was partnerships are key. We would find, a company like Sienna is a great example in Dryden. They're the equipment provider. We came to them with the municipal network and the report that we created, and having them on board has been very helpful to understand the additional tasks that we don't even know that we need to do yet. You don't want to be in a situation where people are holding you to every letter of a contract, and not helping you out. Sienna's got skin in the game. They need to see Dryden's projects succeed just as much as Dryden does. So there's mutual benefit there. We also really looked at finding local subcontractors, because we're going to have to work with these people early. Often we're going to have to get a hold of them if something goes wrong. So finding local subcontractors was key. And again, I'll use the town of Dryden as a quick example. Approximately 6,000 households, 94 square miles. So actually, a fairly large municipal network for a rural area. Municipally owned and operated fiber to the home system. So they'll have the symmetrical advantage, they'll have the fiber advantage, they'll have the speed advantage, they'll have the price advantage, they'll have the reliability advantage. Internet service only, so no television or phone. That keeps us out of the regulation, but we will offer information on what services are available. It's a subcontractor model with a committee that's going to oversee, and Jason can speak a little bit to this, but there's some discussions of, how are we going to grow into this as a town? We know we're going to have to start as a subcontractor model. A lot of this is going to be capital construction on the front end, but we feel like we're going to have a transition into a slower operation, and we can probably hire someone to do that. Dryden's going to look at attempting a rate reduction model. So instead of being set on our rate all the way through the existence of Dryden Fiber, we're going to look at it every so often and see how we can reduce that rate based on the prices and the values that we're seeing. Because at the end of the day, Dryden this is going to be a 501c3. It's going to operate in the free market, and there's no restriction of competition. So we're going to go in and we're going to compete with Spectrum, and we're going to compete with the incumbent providers, and it's going to be upon us to provide a superior service to customers and win their service. And we believe we can do that because of our competitive advantages, which are faster speeds, symmetrical bandwidth, superior technology, and a flat rate with a potential to reduce it. So if we can just cover all our bases, give them a good service at a good price that's consistent, and put the focus where we need to do it, we should be able to go in and disrupt Dryden's market. Again, this is going to provide a whole world of possibility. Public or private 5G systems, public Wi-Fi is going to be an option Anywhere where we have fiber, we're going to be able to put a wireless access point and allow for public access if that's something the town chooses to do. We can guarantee remote access to remote learning within the town boundaries. We can control costs. And ultimately, it's going to provide some economic development. Some financing tips would be to invest in a study that develops a master plan. I think collecting the data, forming the data in a way that justifies it to the public is important. And that's an early step, but an important one. Another tip would be to, while you may have a master plan, scope smaller projects working towards your master plan, whether they be phases and different funding opportunities that you phase around. That helps you accomplish the work over a period of time. Look to state and federal funding to reduce the cost of the projects. So in Dryden's situation, we looked at the whole cost of the whole project, but we're chipping away at it, whether it be ARC, congressional spending requests, the upcoming state money that's going to be available. We're just going to continue to go for these funding opportunities and try to reduce the amount that we actually have to borrow to build out. The other way that we did that is we separated the cost between the base infrastructure and the home installations financially. So we're going to borrow enough money to build the base infrastructure, and we know that's going to cost a certain amount of money. But what we don't know is how many customers are ultimately going to sign up. And that's a big if. So we don't want to borrow for all the customers we think are going to sign up, because if they don't sign up, then we borrowed for that money and we got to figure out. So instead, we're going to do it in a more of a rolled out approach with the financing, so that we don't have all that money on the books at any one time. And that's kind of leads into the next bullet point, where we utilize bands and bonds to structure the debt wisely, because the models that I described, definitely the municipal model is going to operate at a loss in year 1 or 2, because you have a lot of capital construction going on and your subscriber uptake is going to slowly increase because you're deploying in a green field and you've got to market to these people. You got to sign them up. You got to get them installed. So that's one key thing to know is if you can overcome the hurdle of being cash flow negative for 1 and 2, that's the real trick of this thing. But then once that happens, subscription fees, if left alone, can go way up, if we get the take rate that we anticipate. And then that's going to service the debt, any debt that we end up having at the end of the project. And that's what I got.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just open it up to questions. Robert, did you have Robert or Rich or?
I've got a whole lot of questions, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation here. You talk about a community survey, 94% positive response to it. That's not the same thing as a true market study. Have you done a market study to see how many people in your community are likely to switch from Spectrum to the Dryden fiber?
So we've done a few different things. Part of the same report that contained the survey results contained a market analysis, I'll call it, where we identified who the providers were, what they provide, what technology they provide, what cost they provided at. And then on top of that, we asked a variety of questions in the survey, some of which informed, would you be willing to make a switch from your incumbent provider to a new provider? So we actually had a nice sample size of the 6,000 households. We got roughly almost 2,000 responses back. So roughly 1/3 response rate from the town. So not only was there the 94% that were willing to sign up for a municipal service, there was, we also asked the question, I'd have to look up the exact results of it, but would you switch from your incumbent provider? That was important for us to know. So between knowing what the market looked like, what services were out there, and then what the general public had for these couple of questions, we felt very confident that not only that there was the lack of any type of service like this, but there is some, but here's where it's at. And then the other thing is Spectrum told us they were doing a lot of fiber to the home within the town of Dryden, and our survey revealed way less of that than what was claimed. So there was a lot of data coming in from a bunch of different directions with regards to the market and the current providers. So that's what gave us the confidence to move forward with the project.
One of the handicaps that I see you having is not being able to bundle internet with television. Most people still want to have a TV cable in their home, and they're still going to have to contract with Spectrum for that. And I wonder if the people realize who said that they would be interested in switching, realize they'd only be switching for their broadband. They wouldn't be switching for their cable TV. And in sum total with those two charges, they might end up spending more.
Yeah, there was roughly 25%. We did ask that question. There's roughly 25% of the community that did state that. You know, there was, so of those results, there were some folks that said, yes, I do still subscribe to that service. So that, you know, that is going to be an issue for us. And if you want to still subscribe to cable television, you know, that is your prerogative. I do think that what I see with regards to what Spectrum and others are doing is they're even moving away from that model. Spectrum has an app. You can subscribe to their television service without getting a cable box, and you can just log into Spectrum's app and have the same television service that you could get through a cable box. So I think they're starting to see the writing on the wall, that their infrastructure is starting to limit them. So something's got to break here, but they've got to either still support this cable television network for 25% of the population and decreasing, or they've got to come to a pure data network like others are. And right now their phone system really does that. It's all over their network. They don't even do it over traditional telephone until it gets to the back end. So we did ask the question, and there was a group of folks who did still use that. And I don't think we got as specific as to say, are you willing to give it up? But we did ask the population how many of them use those services.
And they also must realize, though, that they're not just going to be dealing with a private entity. They're going to have a monthly cable bill, and they're also going to probably have a tax bill that's going to go up, because you're talking a $15 million expense, and not all of that will probably be paid back by revenues, and there will be a taxpayer component in it, and it might be rather burdensome. Do they realize that that's going to happen?
Well, Bob, I mean, the model that we have proposed, and we actually had analyzed by I guess an economist up at Cornell, is actually revenue-based service. So the system is going to be self-supporting. It's, you know, some of these initial costs are coming out of our unreserved fund balance, but they're all going to get paid back.
Because in terms of other towns, I mean, you're in Enfield, it would be preclusive to think of spending $15 million or anything close to that to go head to head with Hafley Cable. You know, you
Well,
never.
I mean, I think, you know, I mean, Bob, you know, this is why I said it's not right for every town, but the you know, kind of, you know, the model here is to not have it rely on any property tax whatsoever, which is the way other municipal services are run anyhow, whether they're come out of an electric cooperative or something else, which are all basically, you know, the way you think about them in like local government corporations. They run the same. They're just being operated like that.
So what I would add,
we're also getting as much grant money as we possibly can to offset the construction cost, but and if you look at the study, we actually built it on only getting like a 2,000 customer. They're expecting to get 2,000 customers, but we fully expect to get probably twice that.
And just to add to that financial piece of it, that's kind of where we came into the strategy. So we've been working with a company called Municipal Solutions. So our strategy has really been secure grant funding to reduce the amount that we have to finance and get our debt service down as low as we possibly can, so that we can, it takes it easier on us for what we have to guarantee for a take rate. And then after that, use a combination of bond anticipation notes and revenue anticipation notes, combined with any federal funding that you got, in Dryden's case, ARC and some others that we've applied for. And then push that debt payment out as far as you can, because that allows you the time to pick up the subscribers. And that's where you deal with some of that issue, where you get your subscription fees up to a point where you can sustain not only the operational costs, which in Dryden we've gone through securing all the contractors, and then the additional bond payment that you'll have, that'll come due whenever Jeff from Municipal Solutions tells us it'll come due. So that was kind of our strategy to reduce that risk and deal with our cash flow negative upfront situation.
And how do you avoid politics getting infused in this? Right now, Democrats control government in Dryden. What happens if Republicans come in a few years and say, this is something that we in government would call socialism, and we're not going to have government running a broadband system. We're going to offload it to the private sector. How do you stop that from happening?
Jason, you want me to take that one, Jason?
Yeah, Dan, you can take that one.
Well, look, the thing is that the dissatisfaction with cable and internet service is bipartisan, and we've learned going door to door talking about this project that the Republicans, independents hate their cable providers as much as the Democrats, and so it's like potholes. There's no Republican or Democrat way. There are a couple free market people who have spoken out about this issue and don't think the government should be in this role, but they're a minority. And since I'm an extreme minority, and since Jason and I and the board have been talking about this project for several years now, it's gone through several election cycles, and we basically, had referendums on our agenda, and this is a big part of our agenda. And so I think we've put that one to rest, that our residents support this.
Has there been a referendum on this?
Good policy makes good politics.
Has it gone to the voters as a referendum or not?
No, we are not putting this before the voters as a referendum. That's referendum.
It's been an issue, a specific issue in the election for 2 cycles, for 4 years. But if you wanted to talk about legally protecting it, the way you would do it is you'd spin it off into an LDC. And then it would be separate. It would still be town owned, but it would be you put all the assets into the LDC, and then it would be operated separately.
But what happens if things don't work out as planned and the taxpayers find that they have to subsidize this to an extent? Might the political winds change then?
Well, that's a risk to take in government. I mean, we had that same argument put forward about the rail trail, and we found the funding and we're building the trail. I mean, I think if we worry about the failure of projects, that just limits our ability to do anything. Our town wants us to do this. We've got the support of our public because we've talked about this so much, and we've been very open about what we're doing.
Dan, could I offer up one, internet service industry kind of take on this? Is when you put the fiber in the air, let's say, it could be underground too, but when you put that network up and you operate it, The minute you show that that provides service, that network triples in value. And we've seen this. We've seen this with in the private market. Providers down by me, I won't name names, but you can Google it. And up by you guys, FLTG, for example, or which is now First Light, that was sold for hundreds of millions of dollars. And the same goes for these local private equity would be drooling over an asset like this, because this is it's a money generation tool for them. And if it's built and it's in the air and it's shown as operation, the reason why I say this is that there's always a backup plan because the town owns this big investment. I don't think Dryden it'll ever come to that because I think people will be so satisfied with the service that they get. But you're essentially building an asset that is going to be worth an immense amount of money and always benefit the community, regardless of who owns it, whether, the town owns it and runs it the best possible way that they can with a rate reduction model, or leadership changes. They decided that they want to get out of this business and that network, the town sells it to, Clarity Connect or whoever. Now they have a guaranteed fiber to the home network for every single resident in their community, guaranteed, because the infrastructure is up. It's all about who operates the pipes.
I'm kind of surprised that Lansing isn't a part of this conversation today because it was expressed, in fact, their representative to TCOG was very interested in having this conversation, and supposedly Lansing is moving a little bit toward that. Does anybody know where they stand?
All I know is that they're considering it, but I know that Point Broadband's planning on a full build out in Lansing. So Lansing is still talking amongst themselves about it.
Right. They've expressed interest in this. And by the way, we've also been working with Assemblywoman Callis to get assistance on this project. She's had legislation passed in the New York State Legislature to allow this project. It's affirmed now in New York State law that municipalities can own and operate internet. And that was thanks to Anna and Senator May. That passed in this year's budget. They're also working on additional legislation. It's in its draft form to allow towns to cross municipal lines, both within their villages and across two towns. So if at some point Mark Whitmer wanted us to help out in Caroline, we might take some fiber across Route 70, Route whatever that is, Route 79. Or, if we had an opportunity to go up in parts of Lansing, we might do that as well, if this legislation goes forward.
And the interesting thing about that is, the way Dryden's set up is they have 4 equipment locations. And if they wanted to add a 5th or a 6th or a 7th or an 8th, it's very little lift for us. And, so the real trick here is, if Dryden wanted to share this with neighboring communities, how do we work the intermunicipal agreements the correct way? A little bit out of my wheelhouse, but, that was the immediate thought that came to mind was it would be a very small lift for this network, whoever, whatever we call it, to put up let's say in Caroline, a cabinet, and then service customers within 7 miles of that cabinet. But is it now Caroline service that is an intermunicipal agreement with Dryden Fiber? And how does that, there's a lot of legal ins and outs that we would have to speak with the lawyers and everybody about. But those are the types of things that immediately come to my head once something like this is set up.
And I'm also a little surprised that Joel Gagnon of Danby isn't involved in this conversation today, because he was one of those who requested it. And they have a problem, of course, in Danby, that not every place is served with high-speed broadband, and they have a problem there that they might consider municipal broadband just for the sake of serving neighborhoods that can't now be served by private providers.
Right. So, and that kind of speaks a little bit to you know, like Tompkins County right now, I know they're doing a study. We submitted on the RFP where it was a very in-depth study of where is something, where isn't something. And while Hunt does do that work, and it's very time consuming and complicated work, the FCC and the USDA and the NTIA, when they award funding, they don't do that. They look at the available sources to them and see what says served and what's not served, and then what arguments you have to whether it is or isn't. So one way we've approached it is, let's go for everything that the funding says we can go for, not necessary. And if we overbuild a little bit, we overbuild a little bit, but we're going to ask for funding everywhere where it's available, because you know that needs to add into the overall project.
Maybe Rich, did you have any?
Yeah, first of all, Ryan, can you stop your screen share?
Yeah.
If you're done presenting.
Yep.
Thanks. Just a couple things. You know, the town of Ithaca is largely built out, and so I mean, I'm interested in this from a competition standpoint. It's not necessarily the same, being driven by the same needs that the rural municipalities have, but it is fascinating nonetheless. I have a couple of questions. I imagine that there are certain economies of scale, just like the cable companies require certain line densities in order to extend cable, et cetera, et cetera. How, I mean, have you done any sort of, your intention is to serve everybody in the town, but I mean, it can be cost prohibitive to serve the most, the least dense areas, I imagine, as well. You still have to run fiber. You still have to potentially acquire rights of way. I'm not really sure how that issue goes. So can you speak to the line density issues?
Yep. So again, this is going to be a little bit of a hot take because it's not what folks have traditionally heard. But you know, like the larger providers have a formula that's developed out of some city that's never seen the road, and they just tell them that to their salespeople as a tagline, and there's very little engineering that actually goes into that. My approach, especially with the town of Dryden, is I look at things with borders. You know, that helps me. I'm not a regional ISP that has to just push to the weakest spots and take all those customers. If you give me a defined geographical area, I can create a project cost. And then the question is, does it make sense for everyone? You know, all the costs combined, the total project cost, the total number of customers you can serve. Yeah, it's going to cost you more to go out to the rural miles, but you're also going to go into the more dense areas and take those customers. And the real question is, overall 6,000 households, how many do you need to make this feasible? And you know, at our current cost structure, because we've realized a lot of value through RFP process, you know, I think, you know, we're going to be like dead even at about 800 customers, you know, and then from there, we do have to add additional bandwidth, and things get a little complicated, and we reset the clock to some degree. But you know, like it's not a lot of people to make this feasible, because we don't have a profit margin that we need to meet. You know, that's not part of the factor. We just have to cover our operating costs, and the fact that we're doing a fiber to the home network is going to reduce the maintenance by astronomical amounts. So, you know, that's kind of our approach to it, is not so much look at the acute road and how much that one road costs. Does the overall project make sense?
So to some extent, the folks who live in the more dense areas are subsidizing people in the less dense areas. That's the nature of the, you know, rising tide lifts all boats, I imagine, right? That's the idea about providing service to everybody. So people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to acquire service are being helped by the people who would be accessing service more cost effectively.
Yeah, I like the rising boat analogy more than the densely populated subsidizing, because the densely populated areas are getting the high water too, you know, and that's good. So, you know, that there's a distinct advantage even for the folks that are living in the village of Dryden. One of the most excited groups for this is Freeville. You know, once we spoke with the village of Freeville, they were very excited about this, and they have spectrum all over the place there. You know, so I think it benefits everybody, and it allows you to penetrate those less dense populated areas.
So my last question has to do with the cost versus revenue structure. I mean, can you explain the role of the 501c3? Who is that? Who is going to, you mentioned there, is that for administrative purposes? What is the 501c3 going to do? And how does it connect, how does it interconnect with the municipal government?
I'll let Jason or Dan handle
Well,
it.
I mean, we're actually operating it from the town level at this point. There is no spin-off.
Then what was there was a reference to a 501c3. What is that?
Well, then Bob had asked, well, how would you insulate it? If it came down to it, you would spin off a local development corporation. There isn't a 501.
I'm sorry, I lost you there, Jason. So you're saying if it came down to it,
Like if you say what Bob mentioned comes to, you know, and then you find that a future board or something, if you have a real concern about them not wanting to run it, you can create a local development corporation and sweep all the assets into it. And that's
Okay.
very easy to do.
so that was just more or less
That's just-
as a contingency.
Yeah, that's a contingency, but that's not how we're doing it right now. We're doing it.
Okay. I
It's
was
literally like a
confused by that.
department for the town, like you have a recreation department.
Yeah, that's why it didn't make sense to me. Okay.
Yeah,
thanks.
let me clarify, Rich. Nonprofit, you know, because the town's not looking to turn a profit in any way. Anything over the operational costs are just going back into the cost of the network. So that's really the structure. And then once we get a better idea of what's awarded for funding and what we actually have to borrow, and each year we can look at that and say, can we reduce our rates from $45 to $35 to $25? What can we do?
All right. So what is your anticipated build out period to cover 90 square miles to build 90 square miles of fiber to the home?
So we broke ground in August, and we were lucky enough to get an easement on a rail trail, and we got ahead of our DOT permits. And those are really the most limiting factors. So this year we are starting our pilot service area, which is that industrial area near Pinckney Road and the NICEAG building. And then as we get our DOT permits and we can cross 13 and we can cross 366, we're going to start to cover the left-hand side of the town. And I think we're going to be able to get this done, and we can get it done in as easy as 3 years if we had all the money and no limiting factors. But just pacing ourselves out, we're looking at 3-4 years.
Okay, thanks. That's all I had. Thank you.
Okay. Cynthia, did you have any questions? No, or Mark?
No, I guess I just have a comment that, this is really helpful. And yeah, this really to me just seems to make a lot of sense, as at least over a broader area, and certainly to the point about covering the more rural, less dense areas as well as the denser areas effectively.
Mhm.
So I really appreciate this, bringing this to TCOG. I appreciate that Dryden is pushing on this and advancing this, and I'm interested in any feedback to the contrary, but it just seems like this is a conversation that needs to be had with all of us at a county, at an inclusive countywide level to see what makes sense, if not even beyond that, with the state initiative to attack broadband and get it to 100% in rural New York. So yeah, that's my comment, and I'm all ears, and I anticipate following up on this. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Cynthia?
Yeah, I would like to build off of what Mark and others have said. I really appreciate the town of Dryden being the first mover. It's always hard being the first one in a region. But for those of us who are watching, we're very appreciative of your initiative and the willingness to take risks and demonstrate how it's done and sort of work out the kinks. You know, I think the opportunities here in terms of economic development, resiliency. I could see the town of Dryden being a much more attractive place for businesses and individuals who are interested in working from home to have that reliable access to high-speed internet, which I don't think that we get under our current system in the city of Ithaca, definitely not with cellular. You know, you could be off the grid, but connected to fiber and be able to be a scientist and work from home, right? How fantastic is that? So I'm really grateful for the town of Dryden taking this step. I would love at some future point for the city to fold into it. I just think it would be a tremendous economic engine if we saw this throughout the entire county.
Yeah.
Cynthia, you can prove that 100% electrification works, and we'll prove that municipal broadband works, and we'll all get famous. I just want to add that, you know, our model is kind of like the Postal Service, you know, a universal service, universal price. 2 members of our board do not have fiber to the home. So that is also a driving factor here. You know, we feel this problem on the board. I'm one of them. You know, I've got a good connection today, but some days it's not so good. And so,
Yeah,
we
one
wanna
actually doesn't
see
even
this.
have internet service at his house.
Right.
So Dan's on the Clarity WiMAX service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
sort of
So-
radio broadband.
I would only say maybe the Postal Service is a bad comparison.
Well, yeah, they do have some liabilities that we do not want to have any resemblance of.
Yeah. Well, we're not gonna be, forced to pre-fund our retirement by 70 years. So, we're not doing that.
But universal service, universal price. That's kind of the
Yeah,
model.
and we're not the first model to do this at all. I mean, there's 700 other systems in the country. And a lot of them, they're like Groton, for instance, could use its electric company probably to do this, or even Bolton Point or the sewer plant could use without having to, because that's actually, there's a city in, was it Alabama, when we did that one forum, Ryan, where they use their electrical service, city-owned, to run out a fiber network. So this
Yep,
is
and
not-
their main goal was to connect the meters for utility purposes, and the secondary goal was to provide the bandwidth.
right.
So they kind of had like a 2-pronged approach.
And the city and the village of Sherborne is doing that. They're in New York State. They're using their electrical service as the vehicle to provide fiber to the home. So, a lot of people are interested in this for very good reasons. All right. Well,
All right.
thanks, everybody.
Yes, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, thanks.
Thanks,
you later.
everyone. Thanks.